Good morning-after eve, everyone. I'm Mike at Filmboy24, and thank you for tuning in to a very basic class on 35mm cameras and lenses. As my good friend Ricky would say, this is not rocket appliances. Anyone can do it. Now, when I say anyone can do it, yes, anyone can shoot film. It's really not that difficult once you learn the basics. It's kind of like baseball. You can't go up to the plate and expect to hit a home run every day if you've never swung a bat. So you got to learn how to swing the bat first. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to learn how to swing the bat, the 35mm bat. Ow. Stop with the bat. Yeah, that was cheesy. I'm a dad. At any rate, there are three basic things you want to consider when shooting 35mm film. Those things are, in no particular order, your film speed, which is your ASA, your camera's shutter speed, and your lens's f-stop. Let's start with your film speed. Now, there are a lot of different film speeds. Let me back up. There are a few different film speeds, and there are a lot of people that actually push their film. We're not going to talk about that today. Remember, this is film camera basics. And a lot of this would apply to the digital world as well, where your film in a digital camera would be your digital sensor. This is a roll of 35mm film. This happens to be Kodak 200 speed film. The higher the number, the more sensitive your film will be to light. This is what would be considered a medium speed film, suitable for indoors and outdoors, for what you typically would buy when you're trying to perfect your technique in film cameras would be 100 to 800 speed, with 400 probably being one of the most common for indoor use and 100 probably being the most common for outdoor use. Now, your camera's shutter speed. Now, what I have in front of me are three very basic cameras. Now, this is my Pentax Spotmatic. It is capable of shooting from bulb, which most cameras are capable of shooting bulb, and bulb simply means when you cock the film and you put your shutter speed to the B symbol, your film will stay exposed until you let go of the shutter release. Watch. Ready? That's bulb. Great for nightscapes or really some cool special effects, etc., etc. Now, most basic cameras will also have shutter speeds typically in the range of 1 second. In other words, your film will be exposed to light for 1 second, no matter how long you hold this down. Example, case in point, 1 second. From 1 second all the way down to 1/1000th of a second. Again, that's most basic cameras. There are some cameras that will go lower. There are some cameras that will go higher. But remember, this is Mike's Basics. So essentially, these shutter speed numbers, the higher the number, 500, 1000, those are actually fractions. So putting your shutter speed to 500 means that your film will be exposed to light for 1/500th of a second. And so on and so forth. 1000 will be 1000th of a second. Now, these higher shutter speeds are perfect for moving subjects or for instances where you're hand holding the camera and you're not a really steady hand. And there are a lot of other reasons why you would use a fast shutter speed as well. However, for this class, that's all you need to know. The higher the number, the less amount of time your film will be exposed to light. For all intents and purposes, you probably don't want to drop below 1/30th to 1/60th of a second in shutter speed while hand holding your camera. And the reason is your film will be exposed to light for 1/30th or 1/60th of a second. Anything below that or longer, being exposed longer, you're subjected to your hand wobble and a blurry image. That's just a general rule of thumb. Not my rule. I didn't make it up. Somebody's rule. But I live by it. Now, the third and final element to your film's beautiful exposures are going to be your lenses f-stops. Now, typically in most consumer lenses like this, your f-stops will range from 1.8 all the way down to 22. Now, when I say down, basically you're stopping your lens down or you're closing the aperture. Your lens aperture inside, it works much like your eyes. If it's real bright and sunny out, your eyes will close in. The pupil of your eyes close in. If it's nice and dark, they will dilate and get nice and big to let more light in so that you can see better in the dark or better in the bright sunlight. Very much the same as your lens's f-stop control. Now again, typically most lenses will start somewhere between 1.4 for a better, this particular lens starts at 1.4. Some will start at 1.8 and some will start even higher, 2.8, sometimes 3.5 or 4. Using this particular lens as an example, if I were to set this lens f-stop ring to 1.4, the aperture blades inside the lens are completely open. So the maximum amount of light is hitting the film. If I were to bring this all the way down, now in this particular lens, it only goes to 16. So if I were to bring this all the way down to 16, now my aperture blades are closed, so there's nothing but a tiny hole in the center of my lens, thus letting in the least amount of light possible for this lens. Now there's a lot of different combinations you can use with your f-stops and your shutter speeds. For example, let's take this lovely little Nikon FG, another nice little entry-level camera with a lot of basic functions. Now, we're going to load a roll of film. So we pop the back open, which most cases you simply pull the film rewind lever straight up. It pops the back door. Take your roll of film. You insert it usually into the left side of the camera. Stretch the film across. You want to pop your rewind lever down so it engages that little wheel inside there. And you want to stretch your film across and hook it into the little receiver. And then you want to simply crank it. Ta-da! Close your camera, click it. Do this a couple of times until your counter reaches 1. Now, like I said earlier, this is 200 speed film. What we will do is this particular camera has an outer ring around your film rewind knob. You pull up on the outer ring and you twist it and you plop the tiny little red dot on top of the film speed. In this case, I am shooting at what is called box speed, which simply means I'm going to set my camera's ASA setting and tell this camera that the sensitivity of the film in this camera is 200 ASA. So everything else I set will be based off of that particular ASA setting. Now, on to shutter speeds and f-stops like we talked about earlier. This particular lens, it's different than the one in my Pentax. This is a 50mm 1.8, whereas this one is a 50mm 1.4. This is the more common lens that you're apt to find in most consumer cameras. This will stop down from 1.8 to 22. If you don't have a light meter, get a light meter app. I simply use a light meter app and it's a lifesaver. If I decide that I would like to shoot at, let's just say for argument's sake, f8, I will set my ring to f8, which closes your aperture blades down about halfway. In order to determine which shutter speed would be best for the subject I'm about to photograph, that's when you pull out the light meter. You enter the value of 200, you enter the value of f8, you point it at your subject. It should give you your shutter speed value, which in this case, I'm just going to make one up and we will call it 125th of a second. So now we know to get normal exposure with 200 ASA film shooting at f8, I need this shutter speed to be at 1/125th of a second. Now, it seems really fast, but in the world of exposing film, it's actually not that fast. To achieve the same exposure at a different f-stop, now is when you want to start incrementally changing your f-stops and your shutter speeds. This is simply done. I want to go to, let's say, 16, because I'm going outside. So now I have stopped this lens down to 16, which means the aperture blades are closing closer and closer together, thus letting in less light. I now need to adjust my shutter speed to allow for this. Now, since I'm closing the lens, I need to open the shutter speed. And in order to do that, I have to adjust this down 2 clicks, just like I did 2 clicks here. So now we are at f16, and I've adjusted my shutter speed down to 1/30th of a second, which actually leaves the film exposed to light for a 30th of a second now, as opposed to a 125th of a second. Now, this typically will give you the same exposure. It doesn't always give you the same result or the same depth of field, but it gives you the same light exposure. So if you want to play with special effects or do, you know, your subjects are running or moving or something like that, that's a good way to compensate. And the last thing I want to talk about, and I'll use my Minolta X700 for this example, what if I don't have a light meter? Well, there's a very simple rule. I don't know who came up with it, but it's pretty genius, and it's called Sunny 16. Well, what is Sunny 16? Well, I'll tell you. Sunny 16 simply means if you have a nice, sunny outdoor environment, you essentially want to set your f-stop ring on your lens to 16. Hence the name, Sunny 16. It's sunny out. Let's put our lens on 16. Now, granted you have the proper ASA set on your camera at box speed, or if you're pushing your film at that speed, which I don't recommend at this point, you will use the shutter speed closest to the ASA of your film. So let's give you an example. You're outside, it's beautiful, it's sunny, there's not a whole lot of clouds in the sky, right? Gorgeous. I don't know where you're at, but if that is the case, you simply pop your f-stop ring to 16, you're shooting 400 speed film, and your camera's ASA ring is properly set to 400, you will use a shutter speed in this particular example of 1/500th of a second. Now, this is going to typically give you the proper exposure. Now, when I say proper exposure, what is sunny? It's one of those things that you're just going to have to experiment with. You're going to have to learn. You're going to have to understand what sunny means to you. And that's just a starting point. From there, now you can start working a little bit. If you'd like to stop down to, say, f22, which is your next stop, then you would need to adjust your shutter speed accordingly. And in that particular example, you would go from 1/500th of a second to 1/250th of a second, because remember, that's how long your film is going to stay exposed to light. 250th of a second is half of 1/500th of a second on your shutter speed dial. The same goes for your f-stop. f22 is exactly double your f16, because that's the next tier on your f-stop ring. The last thing I want to touch on really quickly, and I highly recommend you do learn your f-stops, your shutter speeds, and understand film ASA before you move on and start messing with automatic features. Now, this particular camera, my X700, has a feature called aperture priority. What that is when you spin your shutter dial to the A, and then you set any f-stop you would like on your lens. Let's say I want f-stop 5.6 on my lens. Based on the film speed, based on the fact that I want to shoot at f5.6, this camera now will select the proper shutter speed for me. Semi-automatic, don't know if that's something you want to mess with right away. Why don't you learn what the features mean first, then move on to the automatic modes? Because it's really a lot of fun. Isn't that half the battle anyway? Yes, it is. I hope you got something out of this basics video. If you did, do me a favor, destroy that like button? How about subscribe for me? I would really appreciate it. Share the video if you want. Leave me a comment. Tell me where I messed up. Tell me what else I need to learn. Because I'm not a professional, even though I play one on YouTube. None of us are. Everybody's learning every day. And remember, photography is what you make of it. Your picture is not better than mine. Because I'll always tell you, I meant for mine to be out of focus. Hit that bell notification so that you're aware each and every time I upload a brand new video. And until next time, I will see you on the next go-around.